Good morning, everyone. Today is October 17th, 2024, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project, founded by Natalie Armstrong Motan. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler and I are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everyone who negotiates. There's no charge for these great programs. Rather, we ask you to contribute to a food bank if you like what you see. And since we began the series in 2020, our audiences have been so generous in contributing to food banks in honor of our great speakers. One of my favorite parts of the webinar each week is when we announce the running total of just how much our audiences have contributed to date. Natalie Armstrong Motan, would you please unmute yourself and give us the update?
Well, good morning. Thanks so much for joining, Jeff. I'm thrilled to tell you what the new total is. We are now at $625,324.41. That is millions and millions and millions of meals that our generous community have provided.
Absolutely thrilling. Natalie, thank you for the good news, and thank you so much to our great speakers who've motivated these contributions, and to our oh so generous audiences who have contributed these dollars to food banks. Today we have another great presentation. Our friend Craig Nierman, who mediates commercial, insurance, tort, and healthcare cases, he has done the homework. Online mediation, psychological and practical considerations. After almost 5 years of living our lives largely online, there's some things we can study and some things we actually need to learn. Psychological research has identified ways in which our brains function differently in online communications, and virtual mediation in particular, than they do in person. By understanding and applying these data, we can be more effective in resolving conflicts through online communication. Craig Nierman is an AV-rated 25-year litigation veteran. He has represented plaintiffs and defendants in jury and bench trials, appeals, and arbitrations. Before law school, Craig managed litigation and claims for an international insurance company. More recently, he has taught insurance law at the University of Iowa College of Law. He has completed postgraduate negotiation training at Harvard Law School and has published on the psychological aspects of mediation. Craig Nierman, we are delighted that you're here. Please take a moment and tell us about the food bank to which you would like people to contribute if they're able to do so. And then on with the presentation. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jeff, and thank you, Natalie. Grow Johnson County, commonly known as Grow, is a 5-acre farm in Iowa City. Each year, the program grows high-quality fruits and vegetables for 17 food access sites. My family has a personal connection with Grow. Every Wednesday, my wife volunteers during the growing season, picking up fresh produce and delivering it to food pantries, childcare centers, and hunger relief organizations. So we've witnessed firsthand both the quality of the food and how it gets to those in need. In this university community, we have people from all over the world. And my favorite story is how Grow produces not just food that is common to American culture, but endeavors to cultivate fruits and vegetables that are native to Africa and other places. In summary, Grow is not just nourishing the body, but seeking to use food to encourage the heart as well. So I get the opportunity to talk about online mediation, psychological and other considerations, and I'll share my screen here. What are we going to do today? So let's talk about just a brief overview. So we're going to talk about some of the psychological research on why teleconferencing is different than in-person communication. And I don't want to just bring up some of the difficulties of online communication, but talk about some solutions for improving virtual engagement. And then we're going to get a little more specific I'm going to summarize the research on how virtual negotiations bring some unique challenges, and then get even more specific and talk about mediation. My presentation today is based on a couple of articles. Data-driven negotiations will be published by the ABA a little bit later this year, and then an article that's specific to this issue. You see the site there. So first of all, why do we use virtual meetings? Well, I mean, I think every time I ask this question, I get some common responses. One is they're just incredibly easy. And two, nobody has to travel. Nobody has to go through an airport. Nobody has to drive through a snowstorm. It's just super easy. You just turn on your computer and the meeting's there. So I can do a mediation. I have, maybe a party from one coast, a party from another coast, and a party in the middle. And it is very easy. Are they just as effective as in-person meetings? Well, for some things, yes. So if you as attorneys have a trial setting conference, I mean, that's something you don't need to do in person. It's just as effective to pick up the phone and figure that out. But sometimes we have this sense that it's not quite as good. Some of you may have noticed that in virtual meetings, we tend to unintentionally interrupt each other. We think the other person is done speaking and we jump in, but they're still finishing their sentence or starting a new one. And at the margins, maybe there's just this sense that we're missing something. And finally, does scientific research provide reasons for this? And I would give an emphatic yes to that. And we're going to lay this out as we move forward here. All right. So teleconferencing. What does the research say about so-called Zoom fatigue? Well, the research is very clear, and that Zoom fatigue is real. And I put up a few of the studies that confirm that. And let's take a look at those a little bit. There have been a number of creative studies, some using EEG monitoring. Some have concluded that fatigue negatively affects engagement. We're going to go into specifics on those. Watching ourselves online decreases our mood, and fatigue tends to be worse for women and newer employees. And let's take the last one first. If Zoom fatigue is worse among new employees, does it also disproportionately affect people with limited experience with virtual meetings? And could that apply to some of the parties that we're interacting with? So, for attorneys, do you want to think about whether you should agree to virtual mediation, depending on whether your client is going to feel comfortable with that? And as mediators, how can we be extra sensitive to people that are unfamiliar with the technology? Like I said, I don't want to just bring up some negative stuff. I want to talk about solutions. Here's an easy one. So we talked about the correlation between watching yourself online and negative mood. And so it's really simple to participate in a virtual meeting and just not look at yourself. You can right-click the hide yourself view by just right-clicking your video on Zoom. And in other formats, there are ways to do that as well. I also talked about briefly how watching ourselves, looking at our image, has a depressing effect. And I'm sure this won't apply to anybody here, but consuming alcohol before you go online increases our tendency to look at ourselves. So just want to be careful about that. Here is some images from what I think is the most fascinating study that I reviewed. And of course, we did use virtual meetings a little bit before COVID. But one of the good things about COVID is that it spawned a lot of research. So in 2021, the Microsoft Human Factors Lab devised a study, and they used EEG monitors to measure brainwave activity. So what they did is they had a group of a number of people who commonly work together. And one Monday, they had this team attend 4 successive meetings. And what was unique about this is that they went back to back to back to back, so no breaks in between. And those results are in the top row on your screen. And then the next Monday, they had this same team attend 4 online meetings, but this time they gave them a break in between each meeting. And they encouraged the team members to meditate, but the important thing is whether they did that or not, they weren't required to work in between the meetings. Notice the difference in the colors. The blue is indicative of less stress, as picked up by the EEG monitors that these employees were wearing. And red would be indicative of more stress. A couple things that I think is really interesting. So look at the difference between meeting 1 among the people who had no breaks and meeting 1 among the people that had breaks. And as you can see, or just think about this for a second, during meeting 1, nobody had a break or missed a break. And yet we can see that of those that were anticipating a break, there's significantly more blue here. And so I think we can take from that even participating in a meeting, knowing that there would be a break coming up, can reduce stress. And I think that that interpretation is borne out by looking at these last 2 images from the no break group. You might think that stress would be greater during meeting 4 when people have had 4 meetings rather than 3, but there's actually a drop off, and that is that getting near a break helped reduce stress. And of course, we see meeting 4 show that meeting 3 and 4 show that pattern there in the lower row. So breaks are extremely important in terms of reducing stress from online meetings. And it's perhaps not just the break itself, but the anticipation of having a break. The study also found that there was a significant effect on engagement. Blue indicates higher engagement, and the orange indicates people were more withdrawn. And you can see a dramatic difference here among the people that had breaks in terms of their engagements in the meetings. So taking breaks is relatively easy for the parties in a mediation and the attorneys. They get 1 more or less every time the mediator leaves the room. And it's much more challenging for the mediators, who are often going from room to room to room. And so something to be aware of. All right, so based on the research, what are some other suggestions for reducing Zoom fatigue? Well, one is to minimize images. I have a fairly large monitor, and so it is helpful for me to minimize, make smaller the images of the people that I'm interacting with. The researchers have found that is significantly helpful in terms of reducing stress and Zoom fatigue. Other ideas, stay visually connected with other objects in the room. So it's helpful to have a plant or a picture of a loved one or loved ones, or a piece of artwork that's near your monitor, but not not contained in your monitor, and to look at those during the course of Zoom meetings. That can be very helpful. Especially if you have a particularly long meeting, it's helpful to take audio-only breaks. In other words, just completely minimize your window and you can stay engaged in the meeting by listening. All right, so we've talked about online communications generally. What about negotiations? What does the research say about doing them virtually? Well, there are a number of studies on virtual negotiation. I've listed just a few of them. So here's a summary. Virtual talks yield fewer joint gains and increased hostility. So most studies indicate that the parties reach worse results when they're negotiating online, and there are more incidences of hostility during online negotiations. Now, other studies have concluded that there's no difference. Why are there mixed results? Well, I'm going to give a theory, and this is just my own theory, as to why we're seeing some mixed results in the research. Let's take an example of a sexual harassment claim mediation. We have a plaintiff in one room. Let's say it's a single mom who's worked in the construction industry. And there's going to be a high level of emotion there. In the other room, maybe we've got a proprietor, and maybe the proprietor had inherited this business from parents and is really concerned that the parents are going to be disappointed in what's going on. Or maybe there's a spouse that doesn't know what's going on. There's going to be a lot of emotion in that room as well. Now, most of these studies are conducted where you've got dozens of undergraduates, law students, MBA students who are given a negotiation problem and try to, role play. But how can someone role play a single mom who is a plaintiff in a sexual harassment suit? How can they role play a proprietor who might be feeling embarrassed? It's going to be challenging, and we know, and we'll talk about this more in a few minutes, that emotion is a huge driver in our decision making. So I am speculating that it's really hard for scientists to replicate the true emotion of negotiation, especially one that has some just very personal qualities, and perhaps that's a reason for some of the differences. And I also mentioned that what I think we tend to do is that we tend to have in-person negotiation or in-person mediations for cases that are bigger or more significant or have a higher dollar, and we tend to have our lower dollar negotiations or mediations online, and that may affect some of the real life differences. All right. What does the research say about power inequity in online negotiations as opposed to in-person ones? And what the research says is that power is accentuated by online negotiations. So going back to this sexual harassment negotiation, let's say instead of a proprietor, we have a big box store as a defendant. Each side, if they're shrewd, is going to have a different position on whether they're willing to do a mediation or negotiation online. Obviously, the plaintiff is going to, perhaps should be pushing for in-person negotiations or mediation, and the defendant would probably want online negotiations to preserve their power. want to highlight what I think is a just phenomenal book that talks about the role of emotion in not just negotiations or mediation, but in decision making generally. I think some of you, or many of you, are familiar with Daniel Kahneman, um, who won the Nobel Prize largely for his amazing ability to integrate psychological and economic science. And his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is a great summary of not just his research, but many others. And I want to talk about one study in particular that he cites in his book. And just in summary, his book talks about how our brains really have two tracks. One is the fast track, one is the slow track. The slow track is what we would generally call our rational mind. We think things through. We have conscious thoughts about what number we should offer, how we should respond to an offer, and so forth. The fast track is our subconscious. And what science reveals is very often our slow track gets hijacked by our fast track. There was a study on Harvard Medical School physicians. Now, this is not Harvard Medical School physicians studying something. It is scientists studying Harvard Medical School physicians. And they were asked to decide between treatments for cancer, either surgery or radiation. Half of them were told that the surgery had a 1-month survival rate of 90%. The other half were told that the surgery had a 1-month mortality rate of 10%. Now, we here, thinking about this, see that those are the exact same data points, right? This surgery has, you can frame it in terms of its survival rate or the mortality rate, but it's the exact same data point. What happened? Well, in the first group, 84% prescribed surgery. And what we would expect, because it's the same data point, is the same number in the other room, except it's not. Only half of the people in the other room chose surgery. That proves or demonstrates that even highly trained professionals can be susceptible to things other than the slow track, their rational way of thinking things. And so as attorneys, risk managers, mediators, and others, we need to be very careful about having our professional judgment hijacked by emotion. So what about the research on mediation? What the research indicates is that there is an undermining of trust formation during mediation when it's done online. Well, how does this happen? Well, let me give you a summary of a lot of research that is still ongoing. If we were all in person, we know from the research, and I think a lot of us heard this in college or other places, that roughly 85% of the information that we're receiving in that conversation is coming from something other than the words themselves. We're receiving cues from body language. People are interested, they're leaning forward, or they're not interested, they're crossing their arms. Voice inflection. There's all kinds of body language that our brains are picking up on. And a lot of times we're picking up on that subconsciously. If you and I were having a telephone conversation, our brains would know that we're not receiving any visual information, right? And we would kind of hyper-focus on not just the words, but tone of voice, inflection, pauses, things like that. What is really difficult in the virtual environment is that our brains assume that they're getting all of the visual data that they would receive in an in-person meeting. But we simply cannot pick up all that body language in a virtual meeting from a screen. We just can't do that. There's not enough data there in that one-dimensional image. And the result is that there's a cognitive dissonance of sorts, subconscious, because our brains, there's something not fitting. And the result can be misreading of other people and mistrust. Like we talked about at the beginning, virtual meetings are so incredibly convenient. They save time, they save money, they help us to make sure everybody gets to the mediation. And so really, I think they're here to stay. We don't use them in every case. A lot of times it makes sense to get the people together, but they are here to stay. So how can we make the best of virtual mediations? So research has suggests several things. One is to widen the camera angle, right? So I try to not have the screen cut me off here. I want to show some of my torso and let people see my hands and so forth. Exposing more of our bodies help give more body language and help connect with people. Another idea that the research has indicated is using more than one camera for yourself. And I've tried this, and it is inherently awkward. So, for example, I have this main screen, and I could show up to the virtual mediation, from my cell phone and having a shot that's hitting at an angle. And studies have shown that having more than one camera gives the audience more body language and is helpful. Still, it just seems kind of strange. And whether that's worth it or not, we'll all have to decide for ourselves. The other thing is to think about inadvertent body language. So let's say, for example, I'm attending the meeting and I'm like this. Now, you all would, find that kind of strange. You might think, wow, Craig's angry, or Craig doesn't want to be here, or he's feeling vulnerable. He's trying to protect himself. But it could be that in my room, it's just really cold. But you're not cold, and so you're not experiencing that. So that might not be something that comes to mind in terms of why I've got my arms crossed. So in the virtual environment, it is extremely important to think about our body language and think about any signals that we're putting out there that we don't intend to give. So, how can we increase communication effectiveness in a mediation? And there are a number of really interesting studies that have been done on that. I'm going to go through a couple of them. Professor Sternlight teaches at the UNLV Law School, and she said this: the key to changing minds and helping people appreciate others' perspectives turns out to be connected to innately human factors such as emotion, liking, empathy, rapport, and means of communication. Now, I'm guessing that it's very rare that any of us have heard of law professors talking about emotion, liking, empathy, and so forth. But if we go back to the Harvard Medical School study, we learn that emotion has a lot to do with effective communication. And so to communicate effectively, we've got to get into some of these issues. Norm Emminger teaches at Creighton, and he said this: to make up for online disadvantages, participants should take extra steps to ensure messages are clearly sent, verify they were accurately received, and increase displays of empathy. So let's talk about this in a little more detail. Let's take a couple of examples. Let's talk about a court hearing and more specifically on summary judgment. So I know we have attorneys and non-attorneys in the room, and so summary judgment in its simplest terms is a motion for summary judgment would mean someone says, "Hey, judge, the other side cannot possibly win, and so I'm asking you to go ahead and declare that now." That's the simple version. So let's say that 5 years ago when I was wearing the litigator hat, I was in a hearing and I went first, and my argument was basically that I have fact A and there exists case 1. And so putting those together, A1 means that I'm going to win. That, because I can prove this fact and because this case is good law, that's my victory. And so when I'm making my oral argument, I'm talking to the judge. I'm saying A1, 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 A1. After I stop, the judge is going to say one of two things, right? The judge is going to say, "Okay, thank you, Mr. Nierman," and turn to my opponent and say, "Go ahead." That's one possibility. So what's going through my mind at that moment? It's like, okay, did I talk about A1 enough? Did I talk about it too much? What should should I start talking about A1 during my rebuttal time, right? I'm not sure what's going on. But second scenario, the judge says, "Okay, all right, Mr. Nierman, what I hear you saying is that fact A exists, and you're also pointing to case A, and so based on A1, you should prevail. Am I getting that?" I'm going to say, "Yes, exactly, Your Honor," right? What's going through my mind now? I'm relieved. I know the judge got it. I may not win, but I know the judge heard me. And so I'm better able to focus on what my opponent is saying and design my rebuttal statement based on that. So confirming that we're heard and confirming to other people that we heard them by putting their statement in terms that they're going to embrace is a great aid in communicating effectively. Let's go back to the sexual harassment mediation. And here we're going to get a little touchy-feely. We're going to get into the emotion a little bit. And to really understand people, we have to go there. So let's say I'm in the plaintiff's room and we're talking about facts and law and jury verdicts and so forth. And all of a sudden, with some urgency, the plaintiff starts talking about her mother. And she mentions something about a sexual harassment case that her mother was involved in 20 years, and she's really upset about it, right? So at that point, I have two options, right? I've got a bad option and a good option. So the bad option is I say, "Oh, and let's say her mother has since passed away. I'm sorry to hear that your mother had this difficult thing and that she's passed away. Let's get back to facts and law and jury verdict," right? So that's wrong, right? If I do that, I have shut her down. I have told her that what's important to her is not important to me. Let's say I make some good choices and I listen really carefully. And I figure out, try to make my best guess in terms of what's going on with her and how I can connect with her. And so I say something like, "Oh, okay, so it sounds like a long time ago your mom had a case kind of like this one, and she settled it. And, for the rest of her life, she was frustrated with herself because she took way too little. And you're really fearful," right? There's the emotion word. "You're really fearful that, the same thing is going to happen to you. Am I getting that correctly? So, if I didn't get it right, but I showed her that I was really concerned about what she was going through and what she was trying to communicate with me, she might give me another chance, right? She might say like, no, it's actually this, right? And so I'm going to need to be extra careful to really pick up on not just the facts that she's saying, but the underlying emotion. But let's say that I got it right. And so she's not going to spend a lot of time saying, oh, yes, you understand me. She's been waiting for me to catch up to her because she's got something else to say. So she might say, yeah, and da 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 da. Okay. And now we're getting closer to what's really concerning her. And that she's giving me clues as to the fast side of her mind and what she needs to feel comfortable getting this case resolved. So how can we do that? Well, one is we ask open-ended questions, trying to elicit, build trust, build an environment where whoever we're talking to is going to feel comfortable sharing what's really going on. And then we've got to listen, right? And not just to the words, but what is it fear? Is it bitterness? Is it betrayal? Find that emotion and then again, reflect back our best guess. All right. More practical solutions. We're never going to bully people or corner people, right? We need them to feel safe. Otherwise, they're not going to trust us. And then as we move toward the end of the day, I'm not going to create an adversarial relationship. I'm going to say, I might say, I'm really concerned that, they might win on summary judgment. And, we need to look as carefully as we can on how we can get this case settled. And then frame solutions that really embrace the emotional concerns. The other side is willing to do an annuity that will give you monthly payments, with some tax advantages, maybe, 4 years. So you can go back to school and get that nursing degree that you always wanted to get and use that to provide for your baby or whatever it is. Finding that root emotional concern and connecting that with a way to solve the problem, to bring about resolution. So let me pause there and maybe we've got some questions or comments or discussion. And maybe we've got some questions or comments or discussion.
Well, what would your questions be if you had some? So, Craig, let me ask you a couple of questions, which is if somebody comes to you and says, Craig, we've got some people who are, they're not that far away. Maybe they're 100, 150 miles away. So they could get to a mediation with some hassle, but not that bad. And we're considering whether to do this mediation online or in person. What are how would you go about advising lawyers as to whether they should have their mediation online or in person?
Yeah, great question, Jeff. I always want to do it online. I just think that is, sorry, in person. I think being there, connecting with people, where we're not interrupted by the technology and so forth, that is absolutely ideal. One of the interesting study I came across a few months ago that the act of actually shaking someone's hand before a negotiation or a mediation dramatically increases the prospects that that case will get settled. And it also, at the same time, dramatically decreases the incidence of deception. There are just some huge advantages in in-person negotiation, and I think we want to take advantage of those. At the same time, I feel like the lawyers are generally in a better position to decide whether they want to do in-person or online mediation. And so, I'm certainly going to respect their um, decision, and I'm guessing, Jeff, that you do it the same way. But when my opinion is asked, I'm going to want to be there in person because I think that's really helpful.
What about situations, Craig, where the so-called hybrid situations, where one side wants to come and be in person with you, and the other side says, I'm too far away, I'm busy, I'm multitasking, whatever. What do you think what are your views of those kinds of mediations?
Yeah, that's not my favorite. I've done it. And it's, again, as you know, Jeff, one of the underlying principles of mediation is self-determination. And so, if one party says, hey, I know the other party's going to be there in person, but I'm going to, be in my office in Miami or DC or wherever, I respect that. There is, the other thing that, I think we've all experienced this. I mean, we may have a technology issue. Somebody's internet might go out. We have really difficult or garbled audio. They're just great risks. Um, I think increasingly we are having hybrid mediations, even in mediations that are otherwise live, right? So we might have the attorneys in person, but we may have a insurance representative who is remote, or somebody else is available by phone, if we need them. And not ideal, but I think in a lot of ways we have become accustomed to not needing to be places in person that 5 years ago we just would go almost automatically. And so it's more important to just say, okay, we're good. I'm glad that somebody will at least have some connection with Mr. Smith, Ms. Jones, whoever, and so that's just kind of how we have to deal with it today.
Yeah, Craig, a couple of other little twists on it. Sometimes it's a situation where it's online mediation and everybody's in their little Zoom box like we are today. And sometimes there's a situation where one side will gather in a conference room in the lawyer's office with a camera at the head of the table or in the wall by the TV monitor like you see behind me today. What is your view of that sort of online participation when people are in a group in a conference room?
Yeah, I think that's better than everybody having their own individual, being remotely. So at least those people can have live interactions. There's some really interesting research on intra-team power dynamics. I'm working on a paper on that, and how a lot of times we think about asymmetrical power in terms of we have sexual harassment plaintiff and big box store defendant, but within a team, you've got some asymmetrical power. So you might have business partners, but one is a majority shareholder, or you have a an attorney, you have uh, a party, you've got the insurance representative. You may have more than one attorneys, one representing appointed by the insurance company, and then the individual has their own different attorney. So it's really important to help those different members of the team connect. And I think, to have them all in the same room is better than having them out in, different corners of the country.
Well, when they're in the same room, though, Craig, you talk about perceiving body language, perceiving facial expressions. Don't you find, I sometimes find it a lot harder to do that when there's a group of people around a conference table on one camera, and if I don't know them, sometimes I can't even tell who's talking, and it's harder to see their faces. Have you experienced that as well?
Yeah, and that's certainly a downside. And just you look at the logistics of it. The more people there are, the wider the camera angle is, and the smaller the people are, and the more difficult it is to read them. So you're talking about, online to begin with, where it's challenging to read all the body language, and then you have very, very small people on your screen, and that makes it even more difficult. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Jeff.
So then if a lawyer says to you, Craig, my client and I, we're in some faraway city, and we're going to be online. Should we all be together, or should we be in our respective homes or offices? How do you make those trade-offs? What do you advise people?
Yeah, and I think, just going back to your previous question or two, every option is going to be second best. So I think we have to keep that in mind. I would prefer to have everybody, as many people in person as possible. I think that's just going to help with team cohesion for some of the reasons that we just talked about. But I agree with you that either way you go, there's some trade-offs.
Yeah. Sometimes, Craig, I've had people gather in a conference room, but still each be on their own laptop computer, and only one person has their microphone on. Otherwise, you get all that feedback, and that's worked okay too. And then, Craig, let me ask you about comparing the online experience with video to the experience of just using the phone, because in a sense, we've always had hybrid or virtual mediations, particularly when you think about the participation of the real decision maker from insurance companies or from institutional defendants, where there may be somebody at the mediation who claims to have full authority, but then needs more authority. We've all been in that situation. And sometimes it happens on the plaintiff side as well, but more commonly, I think, on the defense side. And can you compare the online video experience to the situation where you have to call the real decision maker at the end of the day and say, somebody's got to say, boss, we need more money?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's been some research on a number of media. What the worst in terms of effectiveness in communication is texting. No surprise there. Email is a little better. Phone is a little better. Online with visual is a little better than phone, and with in-person being the best. Because of some of the science that I talked about earlier, I expected phone to come in a little higher than virtual, but the data doesn't bear that out. So, you know, we want to be in person. Sometimes we need to be online, and you know, the third best is phone, and you know, you can go down to email or texting, and you know, I think we've probably you know, all had some mediations where, you know, at one point or another, all five were used. Um, yeah, online is a little better than phone. Um, but you know, phone is something that you know, often comes into play when we've got some people that aren't there.
Craig, there's a question in the chat about family law cases where parties have closer relationships, known each other for years, and maybe they're going to go on being, well, if they have children, they're going to go on being parents of the same children. Do you have any insights? Does it work the same or different in some of those family cases where you have the intimacy of the relationships and perhaps much greater levels of emotional intensity?
Yeah. First, a caveat, I'm not a family law mediator, and so that's not something I can specifically talk to in terms of expertise. Um, there is some interesting data that connects with this, though. You know, we were talking earlier about how emotion plays a large role in negotiations and mediation. And one of the really interesting things that I've discovered is that in almost every instance, displays of anger and really strong emotion, particularly anger, are generally unhelpful. But there is an exception, and that is when parties have had a long-standing relationship and know each other really well. If there is a genuine expression of anger, that can actually be helpful. And the, um, the causal relationship there appears to be that if you have some people, you know, might be divorcing spouses, it might be business partners that have worked with each other for a long time, that they have this long-standing relationship, and then there's a display of genuine anger, there is a tendency to want to deal with that anger and resolve it. And so that tends to be the exception where, you know, anger expression can be helpful. You know, in terms of how family law might be different in terms of virtual or in person, you know, I defer to people that, you know, have more expertise in family law mediation. My guess is that the data would be similar, but you know, again, not certain.
Thanks for that. And Craig, do you think this is a moving target with time? So, for example, we've been online since the beginning of the lockdown, almost 5 years ago now. And I try to think, well, what must it have been like when people first started using telephones? Was it awkward at first and then people got used to it? And now, I don't know about you, but I can think of times when I've had very intimate, personal, honest, open communications on the telephone, probably unimaginable when the telephone was first invented.
Yeah.
Can you look into your crystal ball and tell us what you think the future will bring as we perhaps become more habituated to this?
Yeah, you know, going back to something we talked about just a little while ago, and that is how our brains have difficulty analyzing the, you know, data on a screen. And I'm wondering when we move to a you know, a three-dimensional screen, you know, an image that kind of, you know, materializes in front of us, a virtual image, whether that is going to help our brains to connect with the perceive the body language of the person we're talking to virtually much better. I think that's one of the things that we could reasonably expect will be a significant improvement. The other thing we talked 45 minutes ago or so about interrupting. We're not sure sometimes when our opponent or just the other person is going to stop talking, and sometimes we miss the cue there. As internet speed increases and there's less of a delay, the research indicates that even a half second or a quarter second delay contributes to throwing the conversation off. So as that speed gets better and we eliminate the lag time, I would speculate that these difficulties that we have with online communication are going to decrease.
See, Lawrence Huerta has raised his hand. Lawrence, we got just a minute or two left. Please go ahead.
I'll try to be brief. I have a quick question for Craig. Fascinating. Just an excellent presentation, by the way. And then maybe a quick follow-up. I tried to post in the chat while the gardener was here outside, so I'm sorry. Now that he's gone. The question I have is, can you mitigate some of the missed human connection you get with a handshaking in a in-person mediation by asking people to greet each other and introduce themselves in an online mediation? And I'll just go ahead and ask the follow-up. And it occurs to me, this was so interesting to me, what you said about this, Craig, and the things you cited. I also wonder what you would say to if I posed a question to them, and after you greet them, please tell them what you're hoping to accomplish today, or something like that. I'm done talking. I'm here to listen. Thanks.
Yeah, your first question is one that I've thought about quite a bit, and opening sessions, and Jeff and I have talked about opening sessions in other contexts, and Jeff's done a great job on opening that up. So I've started to experiment with a couple things in terms of opening sessions when we're doing this online, and haven't figured out the ultimate or optimal way to do it. And part of that is something else we talked about earlier in terms of how hostility or the expression of negative emotion is accentuated by online communication. So if I've got an attorney in an opening session who kind of gets angry and pounds a fist or whatever, the research says that that's going to make even more of a problem in the online environment than it is in the live environment. And so I am really concerned about not letting negative emotions get out of hand, especially in the online environment. So my opening sessions are shorter in the online environment unless I really know and trust the attorneys. And so I know we're out of time, but these are things that I think we're all just struggling with to get right, given this new medium, and don't have the exact answers yet.
I will say one more thing. To mitigate that again, and I think that's a very important point. I usually have a call in advance with attorneys about constructive tone. But I guess now that you've educated me more, I have more reason to ask for that if I'm doing an online mediation, because of the negativity associated with hostile communications online. But anyway, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Our time is up. This is a fascinating topic. We could keep going for a long time. Craig, you were kind enough to post your phone number and your email up there. I assume that if people have other and further questions, you'll be happy to do your best to answer them if people send you an email or give you a call. Craig Nierman, thank you so much. This is a wonderful, very stimulating presentation. pulled together a huge amount of research and given it a lot of thought. We really appreciate that. I know that I'll be contributing to the Grow Johnson County Food Bank in your honor, and I know many other people online will as well. Craig Nierman, thank you so much. And with that, we are complete.